Hello, and welcome to this somber stream discussion celebration of the filmography, The Life of Rick Dalton. You may know Rick Dalton from the Quentin Tarantino documentary, going through Rick Dalton's life, eventful life as an actor. Rick Dalton passed away in Honolulu, Hawaii on the 19th, should I say, the 19th of May 2023. And we're going to have a look at some of his movie poster art, discuss some of his films and some of his history, and go through some of the things that Quentin Tarantino said about him in his obituary. And we're going to have a real, just a short memorial to the actor Rick Dalton. So, as I said, he was currently, or was up until 2023, living in Honolulu, Hawaii, but had an incredibly long career. I'm going to go through some of the main titles and give you some films that they might be similar to give people who maybe aren't familiar with his movies a reference point. So he was born in 1933 and lived until 2023. And we're going to have a look at some of the films, some of his early credits, all the way up till his latest credits. I think his last credit was in the late 80s. So his first credits when he started were around 1956. I say that because there was commercials and things like that as well. So he played young football players in his sort of teen years, uncredited in a short film called These Wilder Years. War films that were around in 56, playing Private Pickford. He was uncredited in that. But when we move into 1957, this is where Rick really started to make his name as an actor. He was in the M Squad. He was in Tombstone Territory cowboy film, playing the Salt Flat Kid in an episode about Wyatt Earp. This is a bit of a foreshadowing for what he became famous for. Moving into the late 50s, 58. I'm not going to go through every single film and every single TV series because he was in so many things. He was an assassin in Man with a Camera TV series. To give you an idea of what Man with a Camera was like, it was essentially about a combat photographer who now gets involved in crimes and solving crimes, helping detectives in New York City. It lasted for 2 years. You can find clips from Man with a Camera online, particularly on YouTube. He was in the Tales of Wells Fargo TV series, and in that one, he actually played Butch Cassidy. So that's interesting. He was in a straight-laced sitcom, Bachelor Father, playing Kelly's boyfriend. He was handsome. You can get these roles as boyfriends, football players, cowboys, handsome cowboys. In 1959, he made his name in Riverboat. Riverboat being a TV series, which again you can find online. It was about a riverboat, but Reynolds was actually in that one, and just kind of about the everyday life of riverboat folk. Aldo Ray was in it as well, I believe. So there's quite a lot of famous people in that. If you're interested in looking into Riverboat, and this is where Riverboat was quite a popular TV show. So he was. There was a TV series called The Restless Gun, and this was the first time that his character Jake Carhill, as we say over here, Cahill, was introduced. And in The Restless Gun, he was so popular in that Bounty Law was made, and I'm going to show you some of the artwork from Bounty Law. In fact, I'm going to break off. Now we're into Bounty Law territory. 48 episodes of Bounty Law were made, so I'm just going to show you some of the how that really captured the zeitgeist. Now, this is from a book of some of things to do with Rick I found. So there's a TV guide with Rick there from Bounty Law. I'll move through this way. And you'll see he became quite the front cover star. I love that at the top is Wile E. Coyote 2 Violent, Rick Dalton of Bounty Law. There's a bit of glare on this, I'm afraid, as I'm scanning them, but some comics that were made of them and some sort of pulp novels that were made of them. This one for Incident at Del Rio, Volume 4. Bounty Law lunchboxes were made. Officially licensed, of course. The artwork from the boxes, from the packaging. And it got quite a name in these cowboy series. They ended up in cowboy films as well, like this one, Comanche Uprising. We're going to stop there for a second. We'll come back to that in a moment once we pick up his post-Bounty Law career. So Comanche Uprising, as I just showed you, was in 1961. He was in a lot of cowboy films. Comanche Uprising, Big Game, Hellfire, Texas, playing Major Travis Jackson. TV movie called Joe Tanner. Oh, sorry, called Tanner. He played Joe Tanner. It was a made-for-TV movie, and it was received very well. It was received very well at the time. And this is the real cowboy era, as you can tell from what I'm saying. We literally started off with The Restless Gun, and we're still 5 or 6 years, maybe 7, 8 years later, all the way up to The 14 Fists of McCluskey, which is mentioned a lot in the Tarantino documentary about him. And but that is different. That's a World War II action film. So this is where Rick Dalton plays Sergeant Mike Lewis, and it is inspired by the Roger Corman film, The Secret Invasion. So it's a kind of homage to those sort of films. Well, it's not an homage. You could see it as that now, but it's not an homage because obviously it was made at the time. This is where things changed a little bit. So he was in the Tarzan TV series, not as Tarzan, but as a character called Brick Bedford, the Green Hornet TV series. And we start getting more sort of wide-ranging, coloured TV shows, such as Land of the Giants. He plays a Dr. David Hellstrom in that. The FBI. Then there was a pilot made for Lancer, based where he played the evil Caleb Decoteau. I always say this wrong. Decoteau or Dakota. Decoteau. And there was a period of time where he was making sort of Italian spaghetti westerns. Kill Me Quick, Ringo Said the Gringo. I won't even try the Italian. Nebraska Jim. I mean, as we went into the 70s, and lots of Italian-made movies. Operation Dynamite, Hellboats. TV movies in the UK still. Even things in Australia, such as Dingo Dan in 1978. Yeah, Dingo Dan. What a great name. He played Dingo Dan in Dingo Dan. Now, in the early 80s, The Fireman was a amazing career resurgence for Rick after sometimes moving to Italy and doing those Italian films where you're looking at someone. I'm trying to think of different people who might have done that. You often see those one American actor pop up in an Italian film. It was a good avenue for making money, but I'm afraid sometimes they got forgotten about back home. So The Fireman, which came out in 1980, crime action film, was directed and starring Rick Dalton. Obviously, he got his good friend Cliff Booth to do the action sequences, and he produced it with Cliff and wrote it with Cliff. The Fireman was the start of a very different style of film, sort of revenge-based. Like The Fireman, definitely, if you can think of those films that are often front covers of somebody stood with a flamethrower and a mask on, like those are the sort of things we're talking about. As certain trends were becoming prevalent, things like Indiana Jones style films, we have Jungle Raiders and things like that. But The Fireman gave Rick that wonderful end to his career. Fireman 2, Fireman 3, CIA Crackdown. These are in the late 80s. And a lot of people remember late in his career the film Coming Home in a Body Bag, playing Colonel Macduff. Now, I'm going to just read to you now Now I've gone through a bit of the filmography of Rick. There's a real mixture of like pulp and Italian and cowboys, but all action. The guy loved to be in action films. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of some of the obituary written about Rick. As we know, he passed away in Honolulu. If you remember, he was on Bounty Law for 5 seasons, so during that time, often didn't make a lot of movies. But the iconic role of Eddie Kopinski, the flamethrower-wielding vigilante in Fireman, the Fireman Part 2, Fireman Part 3. So we're going to remember him and talk about him a little bit. Now, we find out some really interesting things from an interview that was done with Rick Dalton in 1999. And in that interview, he was originally lined up to play Gary in John Carpenter's The Thing, which I think is amazing. And he does talk a lot about his friendship with Cliff Booth, the stunt double, working together on The Fireman. Apparently, Walter Hill of Warriors fame was originally going to direct The Fireman and Fireman Part 2 and turned them down. And that's how they ended up doing them together. Now, there was an incident in Rick's real life. People saw him as a hero from this incident. I'm not going to go into it in a certain amount of detail. If you've seen the Tarantino documentary, you'll know what happened. But there is it kind of something of a resurgence or a comeback from that. A lot of love from people, certainly people who appreciate people kind of righteously defending themselves. Let's put it that way. This is actually a working prop from one of his movies was involved in that. So, in fact, it was from the 14 Fists of McCluskey that we were talking about earlier on. However, he did get, because of this notoriety, he did get invited to things like the Republican Convention, and he went along. He was a very apolitical person, but he went along. He was happy being sort of, as it says in the article, being Doug. He was on Johnny Carson. He was a big hit on that and kind of went into doing better TV shows because of what happened in those. So if you notice the ones when I started talking about Land of the Giants and the Green Hornet, that's the resurgence into the things that happened in his personal life. There's another resurgence later on with the Fireman film. People, I was going to say taking fire, becoming popular. So there's going to be a few books about Rick Dalton, so I don't want to go into them too deeply. But if you've ever read any books like the films of Charles Bronson or the films of Anthony Quinn, those types of books, I've got one of Marlon Brando with a few quotes, like a synopsis of the films leading to the end of the career, maybe some things from the TV show. I believe that is in the works, so I'm really looking forward to reading more about that. So I just want to ask you, really, what's your favorite Rick Dalton film? What was the film that turned you on to him as an actor? Do you like him? Do you like that style of action? Are you a cowboy fan, or are you a Italian genre film aficionado? Can you say all those titles in Italian? So let's just while you're having to think about that, let's continue to have a look through some of his posters. So we were up to Comanche Uprising earlier on. Here's Rick Dalton as Joe Tanner in Tanner. Just love the artwork on things like this. We say a lot about AI, and sometimes in these old posters too, they weren't always like exactly the same, like photorealistic. But what they did, they gave you an essence of the film that made you want to watch it. Think of Escape from New York as a film, for example. That's a really good one. The poster, nothing happens exactly as in that poster, but it gives you a flavor of it. So we have Tanner, Ralph Miko, Rick Dalton, and Michael Callan. Here's one that he was in with Glenn Ford. I don't know if I mentioned this one earlier on. Hellfire, Texas. Again, just looked like a work of art. I'm not actually seeing that one. Oh, Max Bayer's in that as well. Wow. Love these old posters. Look at this one. No one will be admitted during the last 10 minutes. So yeah, this was like a big thriller or kind of whodunit workout. Well, I don't want to give too much away, even though it's an old film. Jigsaw Jane. Rick Dalton headlining that one. Aldo Ray being in that one. He'd often pop up in films. I believe he was a friend. I think he was a friend of Rick Dalton. Here he is in a classic cowboy pose. Nebraska Jim. A Sergio Capucci film. You know, he made a decent amount of money that funded that Honolulu residence through these Italian films. Look at this. Here we go. I discussed this one earlier on. I'm not even going to attempt the Italian. Joseph Cotton being in that one as well. Here we are, another Italian film. I recognize this one with Margaret Lee. Dynamite! Love these. An Antonio Margheriti film. Red Blood, Red Skin. Telly Savalas being in this with him. There he is, Telly. Wow, what a great actor. I was watching Lisa and the Devil recently. Good fun. Good fun. Probably not one he would want you to remember. But most people who were famous around the time had to get skewered by someone, not Saturday Night Live, but Mad Magazine. Here we are. And Mad Magazine having his the fun taken out of him gently there, which I'm sure he'd have been fine with. So there we are, a short overview of the life of Rick Dalton. Let me know what you think. Is there somebody similar to him around that time that you're a massive fan of that you don't think is maybe underappreciated or unappreciated completely? There are so many that people sometimes completely forget about them because these cowboy films are certainly cowboy films are not always get the love that they deserve. Even something like One-Eyed Jacks from Marlon Brando is good fun, So for a career that went from playing young footballers and handsome guys in the army all the way through to revenge-seeking firemen, taking a few stops in Italy and a few stops at the old Wild West, Rick Dalton had a place in a lot of our hearts. And I hope that this has given you time to reflect on some of those films and you've enjoyed them too. So happy trails, Rick. And I'm looking forward to reading and hearing more about his life as people produce those books and novels about him. So, Rick, we salute you. Happy trails, my friend. Happy trails.